Fame and success are the dreams of many. But what happens when all of this is accompanied by a devastating fall? The story of Kellen, a famous TikToker who quickly rose to the top, seems like the perfect portrait of life in the spotlight. But can the shine of fame hide the dangers that lie in wait? When arrogance and ego take over, and wrong choices lead to serious consequences, what remains is a broken human being, struggling to find himself again. In this video, you will discover that fame is not everything. What happens when money and success take you away from who you really are? Get ready for an intense journey of overcoming, where exciting twists and turns will show you the true value of humility and altruism. After all, fame can elevate you, but only character keeps you there. If you're looking for stories that will inspire you and help you see life in a different way, subscribe to the channel now. Here, each video is made to motivate you to overcome challenges and discover what really matters. Don't miss this opportunity to grow and learn more every day. It was a warm night in the big city, and the restaurant where Kellen worked was packed. The camera focuses on a table occupied by a man in an expensive suit and his companion, both uninterested in the others around them. They looked at the waiter as if he were invisible, throwing in orders without even looking up. The man didn't even bother to thank him when Kellen brought the drink, a small gesture that revealed the amount of contempt that people like that had for those who served. Between fake smiles and condescending looks, the feeling of superiority was palpable. The luxury around them seemed to isolate these people, creating a bubble of ego and indifference. Kellen, in silence, observed the scene. Every time someone like that man treated him badly, it was like a reminder that he was far from the glamorous life they led, and it was eating him up inside. As the clock ticked down, he continued serving with a forced smile, but in his eyes, the internal drama he faced was evident. With each dish served, he wondered how those who had everything were unable to show an ounce of humility. This created a dilemma that fueled the upheaval his life was about to take. The focus then shifts to the lounge, where several other tables are occupied by people equally uninterested in who was serving them. The contrast between the extravagant clothes and the lack of interest in the people around was stark. They lived in a world of appearances, where social status seemed to define everything. The behavior of these people, who treated others as if they were inferior, showed how status and power could transform people. The restaurant, while luxurious, was a metaphor for Kellen's internal struggle, being so close to wealth, but so far from any genuine inspiration or altruism. Between the lines, Kellen's silence said more than any words could express. He didn't need to raise his voice to show his frustration. His mechanical gestures and discreet sighs were enough to portray the emotional weight he carried. After all, it wasn't just a job, but a constant reminder of where he was stuck. His patience was beginning to run out, and the yearning for change, for a turnaround, grew with every minute. A feeling that anyone in a similar situation can often understand. As the night progressed, Kellen saw the clock ticking over and over, and every minute seemed like another countdown to something bigger. He knew he was close to his limit. That feeling of always being in the shadow of those who had more, of those who lived a life that he could only observe from afar, began to transform. He didn't know how, but something inside him pushed him out of that cycle. Those who have been at a turning point in their lives know what that feeling is like. That sudden need to change, to overcome the barriers imposed by status. The camera focuses on his gaze, lost but at the same time determined. Kellen didn't know it yet, but what seemed like a simple day at work would be the beginning of something much bigger. The story of overcoming that was to come was already beginning to take shape in his mind, even if he was not yet fully aware of it. At that moment, he wanted something more, something that went beyond the monotonous routine of serving people who saw him as nothing. The sound of loud laughter at the next table interrupts your thoughts. The rich man, once again, ignored his presence, as if he were invisible. This was Kellen's world, a place where he served but was never seen. But inside there was something different happening. What was once silent frustration now began to take shape as a desire for transformation. The desire to leave this life of anonymity, to show that he had something more to offer. Kellen was always observant, and this helped him understand that those around him, despite all the money, also faced internal battles. Maybe it was insecurity disguised as arrogance, or the fear of losing everything they had. This thought made him reflect on his own life and his own insecurities. Did status really bring happiness? Or was it just another way to hide the real struggles? It was a question that many have asked themselves at some point in their lives. He knew that, to overcome that cycle of frustration, he would need to do something different. Something that didn't just involve accepting your position in the world, but that required a real change, a turnaround. The fight against the status imposed by society was not just his. It was something that many faced, even if in different contexts. And so, with that thought in mind, Kellen began to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Perhaps overcoming was within his reach, closer than he imagined, without taking a step forward, but mentally far away from that restaurant. He took a deep breath and continued working. With each new table served, with each new look of contempt he received, his desire to change only increased. Dissatisfaction was no longer his prison. It was the fuel that would push him towards something greater. And so, as the clock ticked, Kellen silently prepared for his next big decision, one that would change everything in his life. Kellen came home every night exhausted. It wasn't just the physical exhaustion of standing and carrying trays, but the emotional weight of serving people who never gave you a look of respect. Waiting work wasn't just a way to pay the bills. It was a constant mirror of the inequality he saw every day. While those he served splurged on expensive dishes and fancy wines, he saved every penny, trying to maintain a modicum of dignity. But inside, there was a voice that reminded him that he could be more than that. He constantly wondered how these people, born into privilege, could be so indifferent to the hardships of others. Kellen knew the value of a day's hard work. He knew the bitter taste of not having enough at the end of the month. And as much as the work was a source of frustration, it was also a constant reminder of humility. He observed, in silence, the contrast between his reality and that of his clients. The altruism he still held in his heart seemed in stark opposition to the superficial world that surrounded him. The camera then shows us Kellen in his small apartment, a modest place, but one that he called home. Every object there had a story. Every detail reflected his effort to build a life with dignity. He would sit at the table to have a simple dinner, and it was in this silence that he would reflect on the irony of his situation. As he ate his modest meal, those he served must have been in some expensive restaurant, not even realizing the privilege they had. But somewhere inside him, there was a flame of hope. He knew that somehow, his story of overcoming would begin there. Kellen had bigger dreams than that restaurant, although he never shared them with anyone. He saw in the eyes of the people around him the lack of understanding of what it was like to fight every day. But he knew, every tip received, every order taken, every dish served was a step towards something bigger. He just needed to find the right opportunity. And deep down, he believed this opportunity would come. That was what kept him going, even on the hardest days, when frustration seemed to take over. Despite his position as a waiter, he never failed to treat people with respect. Kellen understood that true greatness came not from money or status, but from how we treat others, especially those who have nothing to offer us. It was this mindset that set him apart from the wealthy clients he served. While many acted arrogantly and selfishly, he tried to remain humble, even when no one seemed to notice him. Altruism, for him, was not just a choice, but a necessity to stay true to who he really was. The camera then shows him back at the restaurant, a new workday beginning. Kellen looks around him, sees the same faces as always, but this time, something inside him is changing. He begins to realize that, despite everything, the hard work was not a burden, but a preparation for something greater. Overcoming would not come without effort, but each day of work brought him closer to his dreams. He just needed to find the right way to use what he had learned in that environment. Between one request and another, Kellen reflects on the stories of people who also left a humble position to achieve something great. He remembered stories of people who started at the bottom, like Steve Jobs, who worked in a garage before founding Apple. These stories inspired him, showing that the true turnaround in someone's life does not happen overnight, but is built with persistence and hard work. Kellen knew that his time would come, and that all this daily drama was just a phase. Sometimes he talked to himself, trying to remind himself that true wealth wasn't in money, but in what it did for the people around him. The waiter's job, although poorly paid, allowed him to connect with other human beings. And even though most customers ignored him, he knew that his kindness and dedication could make a difference to someone, even if it was just for a brief moment. This was something he valued, as he knew that altruism, in such a selfish world, was rare. At the end of another long shift, Kellen walked home with a tiredness that seemed greater than ever. But deep down, he knew he was getting closer and closer to a change. The camera shows us his calloused hands, a visual metaphor for all the work he had already done. But contrary to what many might think, these hands were not only marked by tiredness, but also by the strength of someone who was about to radically transform their lives. And so, with each step toward his small apartment, Kellen thought about the life he wanted to build. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to pay the price. Every bad night's sleep, every bad tip given, every word left unsaid by customers, all of this was fuel for the journey he was about to take. Kellen always had a special talent, something that few noticed, but that his mother knew well. Since he was little, he loved imitating the people around him, capturing their quirks, mannerisms, and even the most subtle ways of speaking. His impressions were so good that they could make anyone laugh, but he never saw it as something relevant. It was just a joke, something to pass the time. However, his mother saw the potential. She knew there was something more to that skill that could take him far beyond the restaurant. And over a simple dinner at home, she decided to talk about it again. As he placed the dishes on the table, his mother looked at him with that maternal look of someone who already knew the answer before even asking. "Why don't you take these imitations you do seriously?" she asked, breaking the silence. Kellen laughed, shaking his head, as if he thought the idea was absurd. "Doing imitations won't get me out of here, Mom," he replied, without noticing the sparkle in her eyes. But she insisted, saying that social media, like TikTok, was full of people doing the same and achieving something from it. Kellen just shrugged, not imagining that those words would plant a seed. In the following days, that conversation wouldn't leave his head. He thought about how his mother believed in him, even when he himself didn't see anything special about his abilities. When he returned to work, he began to observe people differently. Instead of just serving customers, he analyzed their manners, their speech, their movements. It was something I did naturally, but now with a more defined purpose. Maybe, just maybe, her mother was right. Perhaps this talent could be his way out, the long-awaited comeback he was longing for. During a break, Kellen met his friend at the restaurant, someone who always believed in his potential. "Dude, you should post these imitations on TikTok," the friend suggested, while munching on a snack. Kellen laughed again, finding the idea even more ridiculous. Who would want to see that? But his friend didn't give up. He took out his cell phone, opened the camera, and recorded Kellen imitating one of the restaurant's most arrogant customers. Kellen reluctantly agreed to the video being posted. And so, with a simple touch on the screen, something he would never have imagined, his life began to change. At first, nothing happened. The video was posted, but it seemed like just another piece of content lost in the vast sea of social media. Kellen almost forgot he had agreed to this. But days later, something unexpected occurred. The video started gaining views, likes, comments. People everywhere were watching and sharing their impressions. The camera shows us Kellen's surprised face as he sees the numbers quickly rising on the app. It was a mixture of shock and excitement, because for the first time, he saw a real possibility of breaking out of that tiring routine. As the days went by, what was once just a joke began to take on greater proportions. Kellen's imitations were going viral, and he could no longer ignore the impact it was having. His name began to be recognized, and suddenly the people he served at the restaurant began to recognize him. It was as if, from one moment to the next, everything had changed. He was no longer just the invisible waiter. Now, he was someone who made people laugh, someone who inspired others with his talent. Despite the sudden popularity, Kellen still had doubts. The fear of failure, of being just a fad, haunted his thoughts. But every time he thought about giving up, the image of his mother came to mind. She always believed in him, from the beginning, and he didn't want to disappoint her. She was his greatest inspiration, the person who, with simple words and unwavering love, had planted the idea that now flourished. Kellen knew he couldn't stop now. He needed to continue, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed that talent and effort could overcome any obstacle. The camera then shows us Kellen in his room, recording yet another video, this time with a genuine smile on his face. He was finally beginning to believe in himself, to see that perhaps this talent was more than just a joke. Each new video was a small victory, a step closer to something bigger. The audience continued to grow, and with it the opportunities. The path was still uncertain, but Kellen was determined to move forward, to turn that unlikely dream into reality. He reflected on how so many people give up on their talents before they even try. How many other Kellens could there be out there, with skills they don't recognize as valuable? It was a lesson he had learned in the most unlikely way. Never underestimate what makes you unique. Kellen knew the path would be full of ups and downs, but now he had something he previously lacked: confidence. And with that confidence, he was ready to face any challenge. Now, as the sun set and he edited yet another video, Kellen smiled, wondering what would come next. After all, life's twists and turns can come when we least expect it, and often they begin with a simple step of courage. Social media success came unexpectedly for Kellen, like a storm he couldn't have predicted. It all started with that first video posted by your friend on TikTok. At first, he didn't pay much attention until suddenly, notifications started popping up on his cell phone like an alarm that couldn't be ignored. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. It was as if, overnight, the whole world had discovered his talent. And with that came change, a turnaround that would transform his life forever. With each new video I posted, the number of followers grew exponentially. People from all over the world laughed at his imitations, shared his content, and commented on how he brought freshness to the platform. TikTok's algorithm seemed to be on your side, pushing your videos onto millions of people's For You pages. What once seemed impossible was now reality. He was going viral. The feeling of seeing your name spread across social media was both exciting and scary. However, success brought with it new pressure. Kellen felt the need to maintain the level of videos, to always produce something that made people laugh and share even more. What used to be fun now seems more like work. He spent hours editing, reviewing his performances, trying to exceed expectations that, in some way, he himself had created. The camera shows us Kellen in the early hours of the morning, in the dark of his room, looking at his cell phone as the numbers continue to climb. It was a mixture of pride and apprehension. The sudden fame also began to impact his personal life. In the restaurant, where before he was invisible, people now recognized him. Some asked for selfies. Others joked about his imitations of rich clients. What started as a joke now became part of his identity. Kellen began to be treated differently, both by colleagues and customers. The glow of success seemed seductive, but he still struggled to understand what it meant for his life. Among the new followers were influential people and other internet celebrities who commented on their videos, further expanding their reach. One of the videos was even commented on by a famous TV presenter, and that's when Kellen realized he was on another level. Now, he wasn't just a passing viral. He was being recognized for his talent in circles he never imagined he would reach. Fame, however, was a double-edged sword, and Kellen was beginning to feel the weight of it in his routine. Even though he was getting used to success, he couldn't help but feel like something was changing inside him. Every like, every share, seemed to feed a part of his personality that he didn't know. The humility that once defined him began to fade, replaced by a growing need for external validation. Kellen, once so focused on making people laugh, now found himself preoccupied with numbers and metrics, something that made him uneasy, but that he couldn't control. At the same time, opportunities began to appear. Brands approached him for partnerships. Entertainment companies wanted to hire him. The money was starting to flow, and for the first time in his life, Kellen felt like he was in control. He no longer had to rely on a waiter's salary, and this gave him a sense of freedom he had never experienced. But with that freedom came difficult decisions, and Kellen began to realize that fame had a price. The camera follows him as he gets into his new car, something he never dreamed of having. He smiles, pleased with his achievement, but something in the back of his mind bothers him. As he drives through the city streets, he reflects on what fame really meant. The life he always wanted was finally within his reach. But what was he willing to sacrifice for it? That was the question that tormented him, even as his success on social media pushed him down a path increasingly far from his origins. Deep down, he knew his journey was just beginning. Social media success, while impressive, was just the tip of the iceberg. Now, he would have to deal with the expectations of being a public figure, with the responsibilities that came with fame, and most of all, he would have to fight not to lose sight of who he really was. Kellen didn't want to become a caricature of himself, but that was exactly what he feared he was becoming. So, as the sun set and he made his way home, Kellen knew something inside him needed to change. Success, while sweet, also carried a bitter taste of uncertainty, and he began to realize that, to really enjoy everything he had achieved, he would need to find a balance between fame and his essence. The glow of fame that once lit Kellen's path now began to dim his vision. The camera focuses on his face, which previously showed joy and surprise at his success on social media, but is now tense, marked by the pressures of being a public figure. The life he dreamed of, full of glamour and opportunity, was becoming a golden prison. With each new video, the pressure to please his audience grew, and with it, something darker also crept in: ego. Kellen, who was once humble and focused on his work at the restaurant, began to feel superior to those around him. Over time, he began to treat his coworkers with disdain. The camera shows us a moment when Kellen enters the restaurant, and the looks on his old work friends' faces are no longer the same. Before, they shared laughter and jokes, but now the mood is cold. He is no longer the same. The success went to his head, and Kellen began to believe he was a level above the others. Fame, which once inspired him to be more creative, now distanced him from the people who truly cared about him. Every like, every share seemed to boost his ego, while eroding his humility. Parties and events began to become part of his routine, and every night he delved deeper into this world of excess. The new circle of friends he frequented was made up of influencers and celebrities who only cared about their image and status. The camera follows Kellen at one of these parties, with bright lights, loud music, and fake smiles all around. He feels on top of the world, but there is a part of him that begins to realize the emptiness of this life. He is surrounded by people, but he has never felt so alone. What was once a quest for recognition now became a battle to maintain relevance. As his success grew, Kellen began to distance himself from the people who truly cared about him. When his girlfriend, who had always been by his side, was now struggling to reconnect with the Kellen she knew, she saw the change in his eyes, in the way he spoke to her, as if she were just another person in his life, not his partner. They had constant arguments, and increasingly, Kellen began to lose his temper, believing that she was just jealous of his success. The love that once united them began to crumble under the weight of their new life. Kellen, increasingly trapped in the cycle of ego and fame, began to lose sight of his roots. He stopped visiting his mother often, the one who always believed in him, even before anyone knew his name. The camera shows us a dinner he missed, where his mother prepared his favorite food, but he was left waiting alone. The altruism that defined him was overshadowed by a relentless quest for more fame, more recognition, more money. He was losing himself in the midst of success, without realizing how much he was sacrificing along the way. Financial opportunities also began to appear, and with them, Kellen began to surround himself with people who saw him as just a product, a money-making machine. The glamour of the advertising campaigns, the contracts with brands, everything seemed dazzling, but at the same time, he knew he was being manipulated. Fame brought with it a series of interests that were not genuine. The people around him were not interested in who he was, but in what he could offer. And little by little, he began to realize that he was being consumed by this world, which was a game of appearances and conveniences. At the same time, the pressure to continue growing on social media began to suffocate him. With each new video posted, he wondered if he could maintain the level of engagement. What was once a passion now became an obligation. He needed to keep producing, regardless of how he felt. The camera shows Kellen sitting in front of his cell phone, trying to force a smile for another recording, but his blank look reveals the real drama he was experiencing. The success he craved was now draining his energy, his creativity, and, above all, his essence. The culmination of this internal conflict happened on a party night, when Kellen, influenced by his new friends, made reckless decisions. He had become someone he himself would despise in the past. The Kellen who mocked the arrogance of the rich now exhibited the same behavior. He found himself repeating the same patterns of ego and superficiality that he had always criticized. The camera follows him as he stumbles out of the party, with the city lights in the background, reflecting his confused state. It was as if everything he had built was about to fall apart. Ultimately, the weight of your choices hits you like a ton of bricks. Kellen, when he looks in the mirror, almost no longer recognizes himself. He had let success go to his head and lost connection with who he really was. The drama of his life was far from over, but the inflated ego he fed was about to meet its limit. Something needed to change. He knew that if he continued on this path, there would be nothing authentic left in him. The true transformation was yet to come, but he could already feel that the turning point was near. With his success, Kellen began to move away from Gwen, the woman who was always by his side, through thick and thin. The camera focuses on her worried look as she watches her boyfriend change before her eyes. Before, he was attentive, loving, a man who never left her unanswered. Now, he was always distracted, engrossed in his cell phone, monitoring notifications and the growing number of his viral videos. The fame he achieved brought with it an invisible barrier between the two, and Gwen felt that, every day, she was losing the Kellen she knew. Their relationship, which was previously marked by complicity, began to deteriorate. Gwen tried to talk to Kellen, but he always seemed to be somewhere else. The ego that fame fed transformed his interactions. What used to be conversations full of laughter and affection were now brief exchanges of words, often cold and disinterested. She tried to understand, tried to be patient, but the drama of seeing her boyfriend distance himself made everything more difficult. Arguments begin to erupt, and the camera captures one of these fights, with sharp words being exchanged between them, each one cutting deeper. In one of these discussions, Gwen confronts Kellen, asking if he still cares about her the same way he did before. She reminds him of how they used to spend hours talking about their dreams, about the future they wanted to build together. Now, all he seemed to want to talk about was follower numbers and business partnerships. "I feel like you're losing yourself," she says, her voice trembling, reflecting the pain she felt watching him transform into someone she'd barely recognized. Kellen, however, dismisses their concerns, insisting that she simply doesn't understand what it's like to live in the spotlight. As Kellen's success grew, Gwen felt increasingly isolated. He spent more time outside, going to parties, events, and meetings with influencers. She would see him on social media, smiling for the cameras alongside other people. But when she returned home, he was exhausted, unable to connect. The feeling of loneliness that Gwen felt was suffocating. The camera shows us a scene of her sitting alone in bed, looking at her cell phone, waiting for a message that never arrives. The once strong relationship now seemed on the verge of collapse. The drama intensifies when Gwen realizes that Kellen is no longer the selfless and humble man she loved. He started behaving like the same people he used to imitate and criticize. The irony was painful. Kellen, who always mocked the rich and selfish, now behaved like one of them. Gwen, not knowing what to do, begins to question whether the relationship is still worth it. She knew she loved him, but the Kellen who was by her side now was not the same one she chose. The turnaround he so wanted in life now seemed like a curse for their love. Still, Gwen wasn't willing to give up so easily. She still saw flashes of the man she loved, in the little things, like the way he still held her hand when they were alone, or when he laughed at one of her old jokes. But these moments were increasingly rare. She tried to find ways to rekindle the flame, suggesting nights together, away from cell phones and social media. But Kellen always had an excuse. "I have to post something important. I need to be online, so I don't lose the timing." What she wanted was not fame or money, but the Kellen who made her feel special. The situation worsens when, during a dinner with friends, Kellen practically ignores her. He spends most of the night talking about his TikTok fame, about the important people he's met, without even noticing how uncomfortable Gwen was. When they finally return home, she confronts Kellen once again. Have you even seen me today? She asks, her voice cracking with emotion. Kellen, for his part, shrugs it off, saying he was just trying to enjoy the success. But Gwen knew there was more at stake. It wasn't just about fame. It was about who he was becoming. Kellen, tired of the fighting, begins to withdraw even further, believing that Gwen simply doesn't want him to succeed. He saw her concerns as envy, as if she was jealous of the new life he was building. This created an even greater barrier between them, and every day, Kellen found himself further away from the woman he once promised to never leave. He was beginning to question whether the relationship was still important to him. After all, with all the success and new opportunities, did he really need Gwen? Gwen, on the other hand, knew she was reaching her limit. She loved him deeply, but she also knew she couldn't stay in a relationship where she felt like she was constantly competing with fame. The camera shows us a moment of reflection, in which Gwen talks to a friend about everything that was happening. I feel like I'm fighting something I've already lost, she says, with tears in her eyes. Her friend tries to comfort her, but Gwen knew that the decision to continue or not depended solely on her. It was a point of no return, and she would need to decide if there was still hope. Despite all the drama, there was a part of Kellen that still cared, but he was so caught up in his new reality that he couldn't see what he was missing. Their relationship was in shambles, and he needed to decide if he was willing to salvage what was left. The climax of Kellen's downfall came on a night he would never forget. After another party full of excesses, Kellen, under the influence of alcohol and fueled by his inflated ego, decided to get behind the wheel and drive. The camera follows him as he staggers to his car, ignoring his friend's warnings not to go. I'm untouchable, he thought, fame and success going to his head, making him believe that nothing could stop him. But reality was about to hit hard. Minutes later, red and blue lights began to flash in the rearview mirror, and the sound of the siren echoed in the silent night. When the police officer approached the car, Kellen still tried to use his fame as a kind of shield. Do you know who I am? He asked, with an arrogant smile, as if his popularity on social media could save him from any consequences. But the officer remained unfazed, asking him to exit the vehicle and perform a field sobriety test. The camera focuses on Kellen's face as he begins to realize that the situation is beyond his control. The consequences of his actions were finally arriving, and there was no longer any escape. As Kellen tried to maintain his composure, staggering as he walked in a straight line, the weight of his decisions began to fall on him. The camera shows a close-up of his eyes, which now reflected the fear and shame that were beginning to infiltrate his mind. The reality was clear. He had lost himself. The life he had built with so much effort was about to fall apart. The cold sound of the cuffs closing on his wrists was a reality check. The moment he finally realized that his arrogance had sent him off the deep end. The police car's lights illuminated his face as he was taken to the police station. The news of his arrest spread like wildfire on social media. Within hours, videos of his detention went viral, but not in the way he wanted. Now, Kellen was no longer the darling of TikTok. He was the perfect example of the cliché of a rising star who has fallen from grace. Comments that were once full of praise and applause were now filled with criticism and jokes about his downfall. The world was watching his decline, and Kellen knew he was at a tipping point, where every step forward could define his future. Gwen, upon hearing the news, felt a mixture of sadness and frustration. She tried to warn him, tried to help him, but he was so blinded by the glare of fame that he refused to listen. Now, seeing the man she loved being arrested, she no longer knew what to think. The camera shows us, when watching the video of Kellen's arrest, tears streaming down her face as she tries to understand what had happened to the Kellen she knew. She knew he needed to face the consequences, but she also wondered if that would be enough to bring him back to reality. At the police station, Kellen finally had time to reflect. Sitting in the cell, the silence was deafening. Without the noise of social media, without the party lights, and without the fake voices of influencers around him, he was alone with his thoughts. What began as a quest for recognition and success had turned into a spiral of destruction. He thought about his mother, who always warned him about the dangers of losing himself in success, and about Gwen, who he knew had every reason to leave him. Now he wondered if he still had any chance of making things right. While awaiting his release, the only thing Kellen could do was reflect on his choices. He realized that everything he had achieved was hanging by a thread. The fame, the money, the partnerships. None of it would matter if he continued on this self-destructive path. He knew the road to redemption would be long and difficult, but he also knew he could no longer escape the consequences of his actions. The camera shows Kellen looking at the cell floor, with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the depth of his fall. When he was finally released, Kellen knew his life would never be the same. He left the police station with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Paparazzi cameras captured his every movement, and he felt the judgment in every flash that illuminated his face. There was no longer any escape. The only option now was to face the consequences of his choices head-on and try to rebuild his life, piece by piece. But the path to redemption would not be easy, and Kellen knew he would need to regain the trust of all those who had supported him in the past. The turnaround, however, began there. At that moment when he accepted that his ego had destroyed everything he had built, he knew he could no longer live to please others. That true success lay not in followers or likes, but in the ability to stay true to oneself. Kellen, for the first time in months, felt a spark of humility grow within him. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to overcome this phase and emerge as a better person. After his arrest, Kellen finally faced the harsh reality of his life. The camera focuses on his haggard face as he sits in the small living room of his mother's house. The shine of fame, which once enveloped him like armor, had disappeared. The silence around him was profound, and for the first time in a long time, Kellen was alone with his thoughts, without the constant noise of social media or the echo of parties. The weight of his choices pressed against his chest, and he knew the journey to redemption would be long but inevitable. The time for denying the truth was over. Kellen found himself in front of a mirror, watching his reflection with eyes full of regret. He wondered at what moment exactly he had lost his way. The search for success and approval from people he didn't even know led him to give up who he really was. He remembered his mother's words, how she always warned him about the risk of letting his ego take over. And now, sitting there, he finally understood. He had fallen into the trap that many fall into, believing that fame and money could fill the emptiness he felt inside. But he was wrong. Gwen, who had always been his anchor, had walked away, and it wasn't hard to understand why. Kellen knew he had broken her trust, that he had distanced himself and let his fame go to his head. The camera shows us a scene where he tries to call Gwen, but the call goes to voicemail. The silence on the other end was a painful reminder of how he had failed the person who cared most about him. But deep down, he still had hope that he could make things right. He just needed to show her, and himself, that he was capable of changing. His relationship with his mother was also shaken. The woman who had always been by his side, who believed in his talent when no one else did, now watched him with sadness. She knew Kellen needed this reality check to finally wake up. A simple dinner between the two takes place in silence, until his mother breaks the ice. "You always had a good heart, Kellen," she says, with a hopeful tone. "But you need to remember who you are before it's too late." Kellen, with tears in his eyes, nods, knowing his mother was right. He had moved away from his roots, but there was still time to return. Kellen's emotional transformation was not instantaneous. It was a slow process, full of ups and downs. He began to reevaluate everything he had done in the last few months, questioning every decision he made. The money and fame that once made him feel powerful now felt empty. True wealth, he realized, lay in human connections, in sincere relationships that he had destroyed because of ego. The camera shows us Kellen in a moment of introspection, sitting in a park, watching children playing, a reflection of his own lost innocence. There, he makes the decision to try to recover what really matters. The first step towards redemption came when Kellen decided to make peace with the people he hurt. He knew he couldn't move forward without righting the wrongs of the past. He returned to the restaurant where he worked for so many years, the place where it all began. The camera pans to his old coworkers, surprised to see him, but also wary. Kellen humbly apologizes to each of them, admitting that he let his success go to his head and that he should never have treated anyone inferior. This moment of vulnerability was the first proof that he was, in fact, changing. Kellen also knew he needed to win Gwen back, but he understood that it would take time. He began writing letters to her, explaining his feelings, confessing his mistakes, and trying to show that the Kellen she knew still existed, buried beneath the armor of fame and ego. He knew that Gwen deserved so much more than an apology, and that only time and his actions could heal the wounds he had caused. The camera shows us Gwen reading one of these letters, her emotions fluctuating between sadness and hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for reconciliation. Kellen's journey also involved forgiving himself. He needed to accept that he had failed, that he had let himself be carried away by something that seemed to be the answer to all his problems, but in fact only created more. Fame had blinded him, but now he saw clearly. He dedicated himself to resuming the projects that really mattered, like the volunteer work he once did alongside his mother. Kellen returned to helping sick children in the hospital, rediscovering the value of altruism and compassion. The camera captures a child's sincere smile when he sees him, a sign that he was on the right path. Over time, Kellen began to realize that true emotional transformation lay not in repairing his public image, but in repairing his soul. He put aside his obsession with social media and focused on reconnecting with those who really mattered: your mother, your friends, and most of all, yourself. The success he sought was now internal. He wanted to feel at peace again, live humbly, and find a new purpose that didn't depend on likes or followers. Kellen's transformation was still underway, but the seed of change had been planted. The camera focuses on his face one last time, now with a different expression, no longer one of pride, but of serenity. He knew the road to redemption would be long, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to walk that path with an open heart and a renewed spirit. Kellen was determined to rebuild his life. He knew the path to redemption wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, he was clear about who he was and who he wanted to be. The camera follows him as he walks through the streets, feeling the weight of past decisions, but also the lightness that comes with accepting your mistakes. There was no longer room for ego or the tireless search for external validation. Kellen was focused on one thing: reconnecting with the people who truly mattered in his life and finding a new purpose, away from the distractions of fame. The first step on this path of redemption was to regain his mother's trust. She always believed in him, even when he himself doubted his abilities. Now, Kellen knew it was his turn to show her that he had changed. He started spending more time at home, helping with small tasks and, most importantly, being present. The camera focuses on a silent moment between the two, sitting at the table, sharing a simple meal. It wasn't the luxury he was used to at parties, but that dinner, made with love, meant much more. The mother's discreet smile showed that she was beginning to see the change in her son. Kellen also knew he needed to win Gwen back. The camera shows him nervously rehearsing before knocking on her door. He knew that excuses wouldn't be enough, that only his actions could demonstrate how committed he was to being a better person. When Gwen opened the door, the two looked at each other in silence for a moment. Kellen began to speak, his voice low and sincere. He admitted all his mistakes, talked about how ego and fame had blinded him, but also about how he now saw what really mattered. Gwen, although still hurt, could see the sincerity in his eyes. But as she said, "Words are not enough, Kellen. I need to see you prove that you've changed." Determined to prove that her transformation was real, Kellen began to return to the small gestures of humility and altruism that once defined her personality. He returned to visit the hospital where he used to volunteer. The camera shows us a touching moment when one of the children recognizes him. "You're back," says the child with a smile. Kellen kneels beside her, laughing, and in that instant, he realizes that true wealth lies in moments like that, in helping others and seeing the joy in the eyes of someone he had touched in a positive way. It was a reminder of who he always was deep down, a person with a generous heart. As he continued his journey of redemption, Kellen also began to think about what he really wanted in life. Fame had been seductive, but the emptiness it brought left deep scars. He began to move away from social media, posting less, and when he did, the content was more authentic, without the need to impress or please. He wanted his audience to see who he really was, without the filters and masks he had worn before. The camera shows him recording a simple video, without exaggerated production, just him talking about his reflections, about what he had learned from his mistakes. The video didn't go viral, but for Kellen, that no longer mattered. The complete turnaround came when Kellen was invited to speak at an event about the impact of social media fame. It was the perfect opportunity for him to share his story, his failures, and the most important lesson he had learned. True happiness doesn't come from numbers or fame, but from the connections we build throughout life. In his talk, he spoke sincerely, admitting the darkest moments and the consequences of his inflated ego. Audiences who had once followed him only for his funny imitations now saw him in a different light, as someone who had faced his own demons and was emerging on the other side, stronger and wiser. Over time, people around Kellen began to notice the change. He was no longer the boy who let himself be carried away by the superficial shine of fame. The camera shows us a moment where he, his mother and Gwen are together, walking through a park, laughing and talking like old times. It wasn't a grand scene, but it was exactly what he needed. Kellen finally understood that the best things in life are not those that can be bought, but those that are built with love, patience, and, above all, humility. Although the process of redemption was still ongoing, Kellen felt he was on the right path. He knew there was still a lot to be done, but now he was willing to walk this path calmly, in no rush to prove anything to anyone but himself. The camera focuses on his face one last time, now with a genuine, unforced smile, and his eyes shining with hope. He had fallen, but he had also risen, and now he was ready to rewrite his story, a story of overcoming, humility, and true connection. And so, Kellen began to rebuild his life, aware that real success is not in how many people follow you on social media, but in how many people respect and love you in real life. As time passed, Kellen began to live a life marked by the simplicity and deep meaning he had rediscovered. The camera shows him on an ordinary day, sitting on the couch next to his mother, watching a quiet movie, laughing and commenting on scenes like they did in the old days. It was an ordinary scene, without the glamour or glitz he had pursued in the past. But here, in that moment, he felt a peace he had never experienced at the height of his fame. Kellen's true emotional transformation was complete. He had found the balance between being himself and living humbly, far from the trappings of fame. His relationship with Gwen had also taken a positive turn. After many ups and downs, they finally found a way to reconnect. Kellen dedicated himself to showing her, not with words but with actions, that he had changed. The camera follows them as they walk through a square, talking about dreams and plans for the future. But now, Kellen's dreams no longer involve fame or money. He wanted something simpler, something real. Gwen, smiling, knew that the man at her side had returned to being the Kellen she always loved, with a heart full of humility and selflessness. Kellen's social media career didn't disappear, but it completely changed direction. He used his platform now to talk about his experiences, to inspire others not to make the same mistakes he made. The camera shows Kellen recording a video, this time without any tricks or funny performances. It was just him, being honest with his audience, talking about how fame can consume someone, but also about the importance of staying true to who you really are. The video, although simple, touched people in a deeper way, and the comments he was now receiving were supportive and grateful. The positive impact of its transformation was not just in the virtual world. Kellen began to become more actively involved in social projects, dedicating time and resources to helping those in need. The camera follows him as he visits the children's hospital where he used to volunteer, bringing joy to the children who so admired his work. But now he did so not as a celebrity, but as a person who had rediscovered the value of altruism and empathy. He knew that giving a little of yourself to others was the true path to happiness. His relationship with his mother also blossomed. She always believed in Kellen, even in times when he was lost. Now, with her son back on track, she watched him with pride. Kellen, in turn, felt immense gratitude for having such a strong and loving mother. The camera focuses on a scene of the two sitting together in the kitchen, talking about life, like two old friends who, after many setbacks, have finally found peace. Kellen knew that without her unwavering support, he could have fallen even deeper. It was this relationship that gave him the strength to continue on his journey of transformation. Over time, Kellen began to see his past in a different way. He was no longer ashamed of the mistakes he made, but saw them as valuable lessons that shaped him to become the person he is today. The camera shows him revisiting old places from his life, like the restaurant where he worked, this time with a smile on his face. He compliments his former coworkers, who now see him as an example of overcoming obstacles. The Kellen who once let success go to his head was no more. The Kellen who stood before them was a renewed person, who had learned the value of humility and compassion. In a last symbolic scene, Kellen decides to sell the expensive car he had purchased at the height of his fame. The camera follows him to the dealership, where he hands over the keys and, with a peaceful smile, says goodbye to the symbol of his old life. For him, that car represented everything he no longer wanted to be: superficial and focused on appearances. Now, he wanted a more authentic life, where what mattered were the true connections he had reestablished along his journey. It was a simple decision, but it carried immense symbolic weight for his transformation. In the end, Kellen no longer needed anyone's approval, nor the likes and followers that once defined his worth. He had found something much more important: inner peace. The camera shows us one last shot of Kellen sitting in a park, smiling to himself, taking his time, just enjoying the present moment. True redemption was not in regaining fame, but in regaining oneself. And in that moment, Kellen knew he had finally gotten there. And so, his story of overcoming was complete, not with the brilliance of a star, but with the soft light of humility and altruism. Now that you've followed Kellen's journey, it's time to reflect. How many times do we allow ourselves to be carried away by the shine of superficial achievements, ignoring what really matters? Are you building your life around things that will last, or are you allowing yourself to be consumed by external pressures, such as fame or the approval of others? Just like Kellen, we all face choices. The question is, will you continue on the easy path, or are you ready to make the necessary changes and find your true purpose? If this story inspired you to reflect on your own choices, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Continue following content that will help you keep your feet on the ground. Even when life offers you the biggest challenges, the next step is in your hands. What will be your choice?